This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz, and I'm very excited to be speaking with Ruth Wilson about The Woman in the Wall. How are you, Ruth?
I'm very good. How are you?
Good, good. Can you tell me what spoke to you originally about this project?
Um, I think it was the subject matter plus the lens with which Joe was framing it, which was through kind of gothic horror and crime caper. And when I read the script, I had no idea where it was going. It was just one episode when I first read, and it was constantly surprising. It was funny, but it was heartbreaking. And I just thought there was something really interesting he was landing on, which was on the sort of psychology of trauma and making that horror, which is, what Lorna's going through. So I thought, oh, there's a really smart way to get this really important subject matter out to a wider audience. Um, so I was like, this is fascinating. I don't know quite what it is, and I'm not sure where it's going, but I like it, and I want to sort of invest in it.
I think that's definitely the experience of being a viewer, that it's certainly disorienting, but there's something sort of intriguing and unusual about it. Did you feel that successive episodes, once you read them, changed your perspective?
Yeah, I think the first episode is definitely it's kind of trying to land on that idea of subjectivity for Lorna. And I think it was always you're trying to set these characters up without, in a kind of unusual way and set the tone of the piece up too. So the first two episodes are much more subjective. They are inside Lorna's experience. And it's when she's almost kind of at her worst in a way, and in her most sort of isolated. And as the show goes on, and as she gains more agency, and she's fighting for the truth, and she sort of has less to lose, and she doesn't care about being mad, the camera pulls away from her a bit, and we start observing her a bit more in a more traditional, conventional way. So actually, you can see the show become slightly. It starts off in a very subjective manner and becomes a little bit more observant as it goes on, and that sort of matches Lorna's experience. Um, so I think, yeah, it definitely changed as it went on.
That Lorna is not based on or not meant to be a real person, but was there any sort of research that you did into just sort of this type of character?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of material out there to one about these women. There's lots of oral testimonies that have been written and for public domain. So I did a lot of that, and there's lots of books. There's a great book called The Light in the Window, which is an amazing book, an account of a nurse working in one of these laundries or institutions, mother and baby homes. And so she's between the nuns and the girls. So that's a really interesting um, sort of position on it and lens on it. I went to the west coast of Ireland and just sort of one to get the accent, but also just get the atmosphere to sort of sit in there for a while. I talked to a woman called Catherine who runs the sort of survivor charity of the women that have survived these institutions. So she represents them. We were very conscious of not, you know, women that have gone through these, they have suffered a trauma. So you're very conscious of um, talking too much to those women if they're not comfortable, or, it's like you don't want to reignite the trauma each time and make them speak about it too much. So Catherine was a great intermediary that we used her a lot. There's film. So yeah, there's a lot that I did. I also researched sleepwalking because my character sleepwalks and the psychology of that. It's fascinating. And found YouTube videos of people that record themselves sleepwalking. And that was amazing. That really gave me a completely different way to interpret that scene. It wasn't just a normal zombie. I was like, oh no, this is how I'm going to do it slightly differently. Um, and yes, and then I was sort of working on the accent and the world of that. So there was a lot of research in that way.
You talk about the people that have been through this trauma. When you say that you're making a show about this, is the reaction positive? Like it's great to see the story told, or is it we really don't want, this to be featured in this way?
No, I think it's a bit, it's not necessarily don't want to be featured. I think they are really desperate for their story to get out. They're nervous of the reaction. They're nervous that it represents it in a right way. But they were really happy with the end result and with the conversation it stimulated. I mean, in the UK, certainly it was every paper did a deep dive into what these institutions were and when they closed and how they functioned and survivor stories. So it was brilliant. It did exactly what we wanted it to do, which was to get that story out there. And those survivors are they're fighting to be recognized. They're fighting for their stories to be recognized. They're fighting for not only an apology, but compensation. So there's still things that are being fought for. They're fighting to sort of have records and get connections and find their children, or have at least a avenue by which children can be found, and vice versa. So there's still lots they're trying to achieve. So having just the story out there, having more people know about it, gives them, the strength of, I don't know, or kind of the validation at least.
I think it hits differently in the United States, which has, obviously some similar things, but a different kind of history with this.
Well, no, because well, a lot of those kids were actually sold to American families and sold through the church. So, and actually there's a huge link with that American church system. Um, there was a potential to sort of examine the Darryl storyline of where his parents were, or where he, and that was, they were considering sort of going into America and following the adoption process. That's a whole nother story, basically, of what happened to the kids. Um, so no, there's a real connection to America, and that's always been the case. It just hasn't been, again, it's not really been out there. It's not the story that's kind of properly been put out there or dramatized. It's still to be discovered.
What can you say about working with Daryl?
Amazing, lovely kid, and like he's so I don't know, he was kind of such a calm energy actually, and um he had sort of very personal sort of relationships and ties within the piece. So it was quite important for him to serve that and feel like he served that properly, and that the script served that properly. Um, so I think it was brilliant to work with. It was really wonderful. And I loved how the dynamic of those characters as sort of almost son and mother was being explored between the two of us. And I loved how we came together, and then, it was a little crime caper between the two of them. It's a really lovely dynamic.
It's great to see you back on Showtime here in the United States. And when you
Yeah.
were talking earlier about multiple perspectives, I always think about The Affair as just this show that, I mean, it's the kind of show I think that started off not so disorienting and got more disorienting because of the more perspectives that you got to see. What are your associations with that show, and how do you think that sort of influenced television since then?
Yeah, I think back on that, I think it's quite a big show, wasn't it? I mean, when you're in it, you don't realize the impact it had, and how people may have been influenced by it since. And so many people come up to me in the street and love it and talk about it. And I mean, actually, someone said the other day, God, that character is quite a Alison. It's quite a difficult character to sort of put across. You never see characters like that on screen because they're quite unlikable in some ways. Like the things they do, their actions are quite sort of they're not very, generally not very likable people, and they're sort of slightly, they can't get past themselves. And same with Noah. He couldn't really get past himself as a character. And that's quite hard to keep watching, and sort of quite hard to keep playing too. And you rarely see that on screen, actually. There's always like a heroic storyline, or people get over themselves and learn and become something stronger. But the affair didn't do that. It was kind of probably very truthful in that way, that people don't change much. So I think it's quite interesting, not only in the Rashomon style, but also in things like that, actually the kind of characters it was putting on screen. Um, so yeah, but I'm always fascinated by, to me, if I think of a lot of things I've picked job wise, if I did something called Constellations, which was about sort of a play on stage, and that was a kind of about the imagine different versions your life could take. And I think I'm quite interested in sort of that, the psychology, not only just of character, but of, the psychology of humans, and how you can either compartmentalize, or there's two sides of the same person, or there's 15 sides of the same person, whatever it is. I'm quite fascinated by that and exploring that in my work. Also, of course, it's a great challenge because you get to play different sides of the same person.
I also enjoyed what you did with Mrs. Coulter because I'm a big fan of his Dark Materials. I read those books growing up, and getting to see the show, and just that is something so totally different from all this with the fantasy, war on God, all that kind of thing. I mean, how do you go between projects like this? And is that something you'd like to do again? That kind of large
Yeah.
scale
No, I
effects
loved
epic?
it. And yeah, always. I mean, I love, you just kind of trying to keep it, mix it up for yourself as much as anyone else watching. But no, the fantasy really drew me to that project. The idea of doing also something that could be for children. I haven't done much for children, so I was like, that'd be quite, although it's quite dark. But my favorite part of that job was working with the monkey and working with it was this guy called Brian who puppeteered my monkey. So we had puppets on set, and then you'd work and make the scene with the puppet, and then the puppet would go away and you'd do it to nothing. But he was so brilliant. He brought that puppet to life. So, and I knew the heart of Mrs. Coulter was her and her demon. So it all became for me about creating a dynamic and understanding and psychological understanding and rules with my demon. So me and Brian became like collaborators, and I loved it. I loved working with him on that. I loved creating who Mrs. Coulter was via this monkey, and who she was with him, who she was without him, what they were together when they were having a fight, what they were like. It was really fun, really creative and fun to do. So yeah, I'd love to do something like that again.
Is there something you haven't tried yet on stage or on screen that you really would like to in the near future?
Oh, there's lots. There's so much. I'd love to do sort of more comedy. I would like to. I've just played for the first time a real person, which was I've played Emily Maitlis in this. Amazon are doing this three-parter, and that was a completely different skill set. It's is part imitation, and then you've got to bring in your. So I've got no idea how that went, but I love doing it. Um, so yeah, as long as I can keep playing and keep trying new things, that's all I hope for in my career. And I've been very lucky so far. So fingers crossed it keeps happening.
Also a nice tangential reunion for you and Dominic West, coming at the royal family from different sides on
Well, we're
TV.
British. I mean, you can't get away from royals, You always have to play something to do with the royal at some point in your life, unfortunately.
Well, you've done lots of incredible stuff, and I'm also curious what you watch. Is there any performance or series that you think is especially awards worthy right now?
Oh wow. Well, I'd watched all the films, so we've just gone through the Oscar season.
That's fine too.
And I'm loving Baby Reindeer, and I really love Ripley. I mean, Ripley, at first I was like, oh, this feels a bit too stylized, and then it just hooked me in. Uh, and it's so different to anything else on TV. So I'm like, that's extraordinary. It's bold, it's brazen, and I'm sort of mesmerized by it. Baby Reindeer, again, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can handle this. It's a bit weird. And then again, the last two episodes, I'm 4 episodes in, and I'm like, wow, this is really intense, and it's dealing with really big themes. Uh, it's just really smart and weird. It's very unusual. So those are the two things I'm watching recently that I think are great.
Well, thank you so much for diving into some of your great roles, and I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.